Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Jorah Kai, introduce yourself. Did I pronounce that right? I should have asked in the beginning.
Yeah, you got it right. That's great. It is a weird name. I grew up as Kai, actually, and I wondered at one point, I said, why does no one call me Jorah? And when I was young, my parents would, like a baby, I guess, would introduce me and say, this is, Jorah or Jorah Kai. People would often say, Gesundheit or bless you or something, sneezing or something. So I just ended up with Kai because people that were very strict on names would say, oh yeah, Kyle, got it. But as I got older, Jorah Kai was an interesting kind of name. It was a little bit different. I got involved in like the electronic dance music scene. I ended up DJing as my real name, and people often said, oh, that's like a bounty hunter from Star Wars or something, right? And I said, yeah, something like that. So I thought that was kind of cool that my name, that as a young child up to about 12 was like this weird thing. Someone, it sounded like a pigeon or something. Then I transitioned into like a Star Wars minor character in the canon, which was kind of neat and sort of influenced me there. But yeah, as an introduction, I've always loved books. I grew up from about 6 to 12, I wanted to be a kung fu movie star. And then after about 12 to 15, I thought about being like a music kind of I got involved in the DJ stuff for a while, but all I really wanted to do was write. And so I had this dream as a young person that I would sit in the sand with a laptop, back when having a laptop felt like something that only rich people would have. It now they're pretty convenient, right? But the idea of in the sand with a laptop just typing words, and that was like my boss, and my duty was just to get the next book done. I've always been an avid reader. I loved horror, fantasy, and sci-fi, and I'm not even sure in what order because they've all been really meaningful to me at different times, but I just love dark fantasy, all kinds of fantasy, science fiction, and horror stories. Scary stuff has always been really appealing to me. And about 11 or 12 years ago, after maybe about 20 years involved with studying on one hand and music and kind of traveling, fire breathing, and sort of a circus adjacent life with music, I had a band for a while, and we did a lot of music festivals and that kind of stuff. I was going pretty deaf, and I got an opportunity to travel to Asia, and I've lived in this like cyberpunk super city called Chongqing now for about a dozen years, which gives me a lot of time to think, a lot of time to process. And I've published about 8 books in the last 5 or 6 years, which is pretty busy. So I'm happy to be here today and to have a new book out, and really great to meet you.
So I don't know how old you are, but were your parents Choose Your Own Adventure fans?
I mean, I know, were they fans or were they given to me? I've seen those books. I remember those books as a young boy, and they were fun.
One of the reason I ask is because one of the series is called the Lone Wolf series, and the Kai was the name of the warriors that your character was one of, like the monks that fought evil were the Kai, spelled exactly the same way.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's where it came from. Kai is actually, I've realized, like kind of a popular name. It means killer wave in Hawaiian. Means king in I believe it's Japanese.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
A few different languages, yeah. And Jorah, again, it's kind of these I think my parents were hippies, really. They
nothing wrong with that.
And traveled around, yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I knew it from the Lone Wolf series, so I just figured I'd ask. Although those were coming out in the 80s, so depending on age.
I was born in 79.
Okay, so all right. So the next part before we get started, we do have to do the religion questions. Are you ready for this?
Sure, hit me.
All right, Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
No, they're all great. I think Return of the Jedi was the first movie I saw in theaters when I was like 4 years old.
Okay.
So of course, probably my first love. My aunt on my mom's side, Aunt Ross, took me to meet LeVar Burton. I was about 9 years old. So Next Generation, and that was really neat. And then Brent Spiner, Data. So that was cool. So Star Trek was also very impactful for me. And as I guess maybe a teenager, Firefly was. It's a wonderful show. Nathan Fillion and the crew is so underrated, right? With a cult fan base. On this one, I'd probably have to say all three. but I probably fell in love first with Star Wars, then with Star Trek, and then with Firefly. But they're all pretty awesome.
Okay. I know obviously LeVar Burton was famous for the Star Trek, but I always remember him as the Reading Rainbow guy.
Yeah, me too.
And whenever I hear that, I can hear the theme song in my head. Take a look.
It's in my head too.
Right, it's Reading Rainbow. I won't sing it because I don't want to accidentally
do it at the end of
myself. But
yeah, how about you? What's your?
Out of that choice, I really do love Firefly because the space western, and I like the lost cause narrative, where just because you're right doesn't always mean you win, but you get up and you keep going on anyway. I kind of like that theme. Growing up in the South of the U.S., that there is some resonance to our past. Although I can't really like I have relatives that fought on both sides of that war, so it's not so much the lost cause. It's just the soldier in me recognizes that you have more in common, even with your enemy soldiers that were willing to put their life on the line, just like you were sometimes, than you do with the people back home, regardless of who they fought for. So the lost cause narrative was always kind of romanticized, and Firefly gives that to you. I like Star Wars because it feels lived in. Too often in sci-fi, you'll see where they're on these foreign planets or they're doing all these things and everything is so clean. And like you've lived in, I want to say third world country because I don't think China qualifies, but in touring China, you've seen some very poor regions. I mean, nothing is clean in those places, right? And I'm not even talking about like pollution, just there's dirt, right? When you're out in nature, that happens.
Other Asian countries too. Like I went to a beautiful beach holiday in the Philippines, but driving through, I think like Jakarta or something, like this some places it's just like plastic garbage everywhere, and you go, oh my god.
And aside from that pollution, I just mean like being in somewhere that's not quote modern, you're going to get dirty, and so all these people will write those alien planets or these fantasy settings or whatever, and everything is just so sterile. And I'm like, that's tell me you've never left suburbia without telling me you've never left suburbia.
You think Star Trek clean then? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Star Trek is a little too sanitary for me. Everything felt too utopian, and it just I liked aspects of it. I liked some of the moral questions. I liked the idea of the hollow deck, although admittedly we'd abuse it in various ways. If you ever watch the opening scene of the Orville where they're doing the samurai fighting the samurai orc, like I could imagine doing something like that, like just for the fun of it. But I like some of the innovation. I like that it inspired people. Like there's a Mexican physicist, Miguel Alcubierre, and I'm probably butchering his name, but he actually came up with a mathematical formula for warp drive because he was so inspired by Star Trek.
That's phenomenal. But I mean, that happens a lot in science fiction, though, right? A lot.
Yeah, it does.
And then the engineers catch up, right?
And I like that. And what comes first? Is it the sci-fi imagining it and the engineers catching up, or engineers theorizing and sci-fi latching onto it, and then when it turns out the theory was right? I think it's a little bit of column A, a little column B.
A bit of both, yeah.
But I know at one point in time, a couple years ago, we're talking probably right before COVID hit, there was an X Prize, which is run by DARPA in the U.S., Defense Agency Research, something. But anyway, one of their research things, they pay every year a contest to try to push innovation. And the X Prize went to a group of kids that basically programmed the tricorder in Star Trek, where they would, like the doc would use to scan people for illnesses. Now, it is limited in its functionality at this point because, it's the old adage, if you use WebMD, you inevitably find out you're dying of cancer no matter what your symptoms are.
Sure.
And so there's, obviously you still need the doctor's oversight, but for simple things, it was able to, in a way, like if you're a young parent and your kid's little, is this a cold, bacteria, like, very rudimentary, but the idea that you could have that in your pocket without having to like go to the internet was just kind of fascinating.
It is really cool. Yeah.
So I do like that. Although my favorite, when it comes to just sci-fis in general, I really loved Stargate. Have you seen that one?
I have seen some Stargate. Yeah.
I absolutely love that one. And I follow, the podcast, since I don't have a private Twitter, but the actor, Dean Anderson, has an account as Jack O'Neill, his character, and he's constantly like the bit is shilling all of the products because they get money every time this airs, right? So there's monetary for him, and hey, no power, no shade to him, right? But he also is the running bit is that Stargate was a documentary, and the government just classified it, so they had to pretend it wasn't real, and that just amuses me. And there's the jokes as a Canadian you'll appreciate where every alien planet looks like Toronto.
Oh yeah.
Because it's filmed in the woods. In fact, the character, Amanda Tapping had a one-liner on that. Why do all the alien planets look like Toronto? And the lore is that was not in the script. She added that one in, and they just liked it and kept it, and it became a running bit.
I lived in Toronto before I moved to Chongqing. We did do a lot of filming there. I had a lot of friends that were in various capacities filming different stuff.
And all the woods make perfect sort of for the untapped wilderness look. But yeah, so I really do love Stargate. And then I also, are you familiar with Terra Nova? Did you watch that when it came on?
I'm not really sure if I did. No, sorry.
The idea was that Earth was so polluted that they invented a time machine to go back to the Cretaceous period. And then it would create a parallel dimension, and then you could rebuild society. And on a clean planet, you've just got to survive the dinosaurs. And of course, modern technology.
A little bit of that, yeah.
Modern technology gave them the leg up. And I really liked it, but it was on Fox Entertainment, where good shows go to die.
Yeah, sure. And so the pilot was really good. The first 3 episodes or something.
I love the entire first season, and then they ended the season on a cliffhanger, not knowing they were going to get canceled.
Yeah, right.
And you're just left hanging. I really love that one. And then Primeval, New World, where sort of like an X-Files story, but instead of aliens and whatnot, there were time anomalies, and through those time anomalies, creatures from the past would come through. And so that's how you get all the cryptid lore, is they're just, ancient critters coming through and not being understood as what they're being seen. And this
this is interesting.
Yeah, and the whole group's premise was they were to get the creatures to go back to the other side, so the anomaly, before the anomaly closes, so you don't end up with T-Rex eating little Johnny at the park. And the original one was set in the UK, and then the Primeval New World was set in Canada. And it was fascinating. That one, they actually came out and they said when they did close it, like when they ended the series, it was on like a conclusion. They didn't leave you hanging, but they did it that way because it was just so expensive to film back then with all the practical effects, because it wasn't a lack of viewership. I mean, it was through the roof on the views, but they weren't earning enough to justify the expense, apparently.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was
round 1 of religion. What's round 2?
All right. So because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, so you started interviewing me. I see what you're doing here. It's your journalist training kicking in. You're good. We're having fun. Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia?
I don't want to say all 3 again. I feel like I want to put my foot down somewhere. Narnia, of course, as a young person, was quite influential. All 3 of those have great fan bases. I'm going to say just Game of Thrones, although I'm not happy with the ending of it. But those first 5 books were pretty cool. Those first 5 seasons were, I think, at some point, the biggest show in the world, and really, really well done. I think the casting was impeccable. So for that brief flicker of time from season 1 to about season 5, when the biggest show in the world was a fantasy show, proudly flying dragons and sword fights and Machiavellian politics and stuff, it was a good time to be a fantasy nerd, and it was pretty cool. Yeah, I like that a lot. I don't know if George is ever going to finish those last books. Maybe
Brandon Sanderson will write it for him.
yeah, Brandon Sanderson for sure. Yeah.
I've never read the books, because by the time I was aware of them, I already knew there was never going to be an ending, and that would drive me bonkers. Yeah. But I am a history nerd, so I've listened to George talk about some of his process with like using the 100 Years' War as inspiration, and I've seen bits and pieces of the series, and I absolutely loved that last season where they had those 2 issues. One of them where they accidentally had a Starbucks cup in the background. So it's now canon that there's a Starbucks in Westeros. I thought that was kind of hilarious. And then they did the same thing with one of those bottled waters. And as a writer who's had works edited 3, 4, sometimes 5 times, and that stray misspelling or that stray comma makes it through, missed by everybody, like I can appreciate that little slip that made it through all of the videographers that were editing this final series before it went to air. It's going to be like, are you familiar with the Who Shot First stuff with Han Solo in Star Wars?
Sure, yeah.
I imagine much like that, the later home releases of like the box sets of the DVDs, if you get them, they're going to have that edited out. But I like knowing that it was there.
So who do you think did shoot first?
Oh, Han shot first.
Yeah, of course, right?
I've seen the original footage. They edited it.
But originally, for sure, Han did, yeah.
And in fact, when the Starbucks thing happened to Game of Thrones, there was all kinds of spoofs of other series, including that scene in the cantina where Han Solo is drinking a Starbucks. So it's amusing, but I don't know. I like Chronicles of Narnia because for a while as a kid, it was, who didn't look in your closet and get disappointed it didn't go anywhere.
Sure. I think kids have such big imaginations, right? I used to read, of course, Marvel, DC. I was a big comic book fan too. And, I realized I'm not from a planet where a red sun's going to let me fly. But I thought, well, I could end up waking up as a 12-year-old and have a mutant power, right? So for years, I'd dream I'd be Wolverine or something, and I'd wake up and I'd be, oh, no, that didn't happen yet. But that was always the possibility I could mutate, right?
There was a cartoon I watched as a kid, and I can't remember the name of it, but that was one of the things is the guy was like a janitor or something, and he got mutant powers because there was like toxic, in the cartoons, Toxic Avenger, yeah. In the books, in the media of the day, like there was just toxic stuff everywhere. It's right up there with quicksand, like it was just everywhere.
Yeah, quicksand is one of those things as a young child you thought would be a bigger deal than it ended up really being.
Yes.
Yeah, and lava too. Floor has not often been lava where I've lived, but I'm ready for it.
Yeah, the jokes about that one when they started digging up the Pompeii stuff and they were making progress finally on some of that was the original Floor Lava champions. It was pretty amusing.
Yeah, I went to Italy before the COVID actually with my wife. We did a Europe trip for my 40th birthday, 2019, and actually made it to Pompeii for a day. It was interesting. In some ways, very interesting. In some ways, a bit underwhelming. I was looking. There's all these pictures of the people, like having sex and stuff, all like frozen in ash. I didn't see as much of that. Maybe they put that in the adult section or something for the kids.
So actually, it's a misunderstanding. They weren't actually having sex. They were hugging each other. But it has to do with how the body reacted to the heat and then the drop in temperature as it was smothered. And I don't understand all of the bioscience behind it, but they were explaining it. Do you know what Curiosity Stream is?
Yes. Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah, I've seen it a little bit.
So basically, for dear listener, if you don't know, it's like Netflix, but it's all Nerdflix stuff. So it's all documentaries. They actually have one on Pompeii, one of those documentaries. We're not sponsored by them, by the way. So this is just me shilling it because I like it. But they had one about Pompeii, and that's one of the things they broke down is the way everything went down so fast, and then it sort of flash covered them, that it had to do with how the body reacted to the extreme heat, and then the drying effect of the ash covering them. So it wasn't actually what people thought it was, although, the saying F it and going out with one last fling, I mean, it does sort of appeal to human nature, I think, to a point.
I think that's why we probably want to believe that, right? What a bizarre thing. Imagine living through that or not living through that. That's a weird way to go.
I don't know. There are some mysteries that I kind of am glad we don't solve. So, for instance, I grew up, like I said, in the Southern Virginia, like the Roanoke, whatever happened to the lost Roanoke colony. And they actually, through new discoveries, think they know, but I haven't looked into it because I like not knowing. That mystery is sometimes fun, right? Because when you don't know, you can use your imagination. And if you get all the answers, it kind of takes the joy of the mystery away from some of it.
Yeah,
so,
I think the internet's kind of a bummer that way. People used to have arguments that lasted longer than it took to take your phone out, right?
Yes. or the fact that we were wrong about lyrics that we misunderstood, and we'd sing it loud and proud wrong for years, and then someone broke down the written lyrics. I'm like, oh, that sucks. I thought it was Pour Sugar on Me, but apparently that is not the line.
Yeah. I mean, the internet's so convenient, of course, and kids today will not even really understand what that was like. But there was something about having physical media distributed globally, and you'd have to go to the record store and pick up your new piece of music. It was meaningful to be a collector. I saw a meme the other day just on that topic quickly. It's sort of nerd adjacent, but they say, why is Gen X so salty? And he said, we had a record collection, we had to trade for a tape collection, to trade for a CD collection, to trade for an MP3 collection, and now we're paying a subscription service to listen to our music.
Yeah. Yeah. And we lived through several economic downturns and historic events, and it's like
Maybe that's true, yeah.
when I was in high school, I had a teacher teaching world history, and that old proverb, "May you live in interesting times." And I remember asking him what that meant, and he's like, "JR, when you're old enough to know, you'll wish you didn't." And that was his answer. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but now that we've lived through interesting times, I'm like, yeah, you could keep it.
Yeah.
So, speaking of our childhood, one of the crying shames of adulthood is we stop asking each other the important questions. So, thanks to some of our sponsors, we are bringing that back. And I'm going to ask you, Jorah, what is your favorite dinosaur?
My favorite, I mean, that's complicated, right? There's so many dinosaurs, but I'm going to shoot off the hip. Velociraptor. I like those little raptors because they're snappy, they're sneaky, and they're vicious. I believe they're kind of like the Wolverine of the dinosaur scene. So,
have you seen the newest research on the dinosaurs? They're pretty sure now they all have feathers.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that, but okay.
Yeah, because I'm picturing like somehow Jurassic Park isn't as scary anymore when they're all running around like giant murder chickens.
It's a little bit more like Sesame Street.
Yes.
Big bird, but he's hungry.
Yeah. I don't know that we'll ever know unless we find some proof, like flash froze or something. We learned a lot from that woolly mammoth that they found in Siberia that had been flashed, like what do you call it? An avalanche had covered it so quickly that even the food in its belly hadn't digested, so they were able to learn so much about it. Like shy of something like that, I don't know that we'll ever really know about the whole feather versus not.
Yeah, that's wild.
It's crazy that we get all these answers, though. Like you said, it's a crazy time to be alive. All right.
Well, one of the things for me, it's like a sci-fi and fantasy and horror fan and writer, super fan and writer, is that even the really stupid theories, like even somebody might say like Graham Hitchcock and his Alien Apocalypse, there's some people said that's like dangerous science or whatever. And I think, well, as a fan of cool theories, like it could be true, and if it's not true, it makes a great story, right? So there's always that kind of refuge to say, I don't have to believe it makes all the sense in the world, but if it's cool brain food for what might be a story one day, then it's still cool to think about and talk about. So that's a good refuge nerds can have. We don't have to necessarily say it's all believable. It just has to be entertaining, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I think some of those conspiracy theories proliferate online. It's not, I don't think anyone really believes the earth is flat. I think largely it's a long troll game, but I also think, the possibilities that some of these conspiracy theories engender, I just think they're fascinating enough that if this, then that, then what thought process kind of can lead you interesting places.
On that note, there was like an adjacent one to that birds were not real. I don't know if that was the UK or America, where there's people going around, or whether it was just a kind of a joke to begin with, but someone was trying to say birds weren't real. Did you hear about that one?
I have, and it started with this form of psychosis where you think everyone's out to get you, and I can't remember the name of it, and that the government, like all these people are spying on you to come stalk you, and there's a whole special name for it. And so part of that was that birds were actually drones spying on them from the government, was where it started. And now it's just a joke. I don't think anyone actually believes it. I mean, I'm sure there are a few crazies, but you can find it crazy to believe anything.
An interesting thing about that, now it's not a conclusive, shoe dropping, but I think at the beginning it probably was psychosis, and birds I believe are real. I saved one bird hit my window, landed on my balcony for about a week. I fed it bird seed. It got up, it flew away. Sometimes I hear birds cry in the morning, and I wave and I think, hey, I'm the one that saved you. Don't shit on me. But during, I think it was one of the Olympics that China had, was maybe the Beijing 2022 winter or something. I read a story. It was in the news that they actually had detained. How do you detain? They detained 1 million birds flying into the giant nets or something, and they searched their rectums. This is an actual news story. They were searching for whether or not they were drones and whether they had secret messages or something like that upon entering the country. So there was this huge effort to verify the veracity of birds, and there were actual bird drones. So some places have bird drones, and some people are suspicious.
So I did a quick Google search because I was curious. I knew it started. So it's according to Wiki, and they did the research and they cite their sources. So like obviously Wiki is only as good as the sources they cite. It's, they could be wrong, but it's a satirical conspiracy theory which posits that birds are actually drones operated by U.S. government to spy on American citizens. In 2018, journalist Rachel Roberts described birds aren't real as a, quote, joke that thousands of people are in on. And now that hashtag is official on Twitter with over 100,000 followers. Peter McIndo created the conspiracy on a whim after seeing pro-Trump, and we're not getting political, people. I'm reading the history of the thing. After seeing pro-Trump counter-protesters to the 2017 Women's March in Memphis, Tennessee, McIndo wrote "Birds aren't real" on a poster and improvised a conspiracy theory amongst the counter-protesters as a spontaneous joke. And so he went viral marching with the counter-protesters. So those, I guess, the pro-Trump ones. The writing is unclear, but he started as a joke to mock them, and everyone sort of embraced the joke as funny and went with it, and it kind of grew from there.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of just farcical protests. I DJ'd at Burning Man in a dust storm one year, I remember, and I've only been there a couple times. Some of my friends have been there many, many times. But there was, they built a giant man, and they set him on fire. And there was a protest to burn the man early. I think he burns on Friday night, typically in the week-long adventure and desert party. And there was all these people with signs, "Burn the man, burn him now," on like a Tuesday. They were trying to get him burned early. And then there was a counter-protest saying, "Don't burn the man, leave him forever," and then it was just the most like apolitical, sort of like pseudo-political kind of thing. There was a million people dressed like, well, not a million, it's called the Million Rabbit March or whatever at Burning Man. 10,000 people dressed like bunnies, and then a bunch of people, like 100 people, showed up as carrots, like cosplay carrots, and they were like soccer hooligans. They were rough. They were pushing these bunnies like into ditches and like kind of like almost like really aggressive. But it was just the idea that it was like Monty Python. It was like all these bunnies running around, and then these carrots were just like, "Screw you," fighting carrots, and it didn't make any sense, but it made you laugh,
And I'm all for anything that makes people laugh, because life's too short not to have fun.
It is. Are we done the religion trilogy? Or
No. We got one more, but we have concretely agreed that birds are real or not. You decide, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I think they're real. Although drones are an amusing topic, because like some of that stuff, if we had written about drones and the way they're being used now in sci-fi just 5 years ago, people have been like, "Oh, that's just too far-fetched." So, for instance, in the Russia-Ukraine war, and again, dear listener, we're not getting political on the sides, but both sides are using drones heavily in a way that's new from a combat perspective. And so because the Ukrainian drones were having such effect on dropping bombs on soft targets, the Russians started putting essentially sticks on drones to try to knock the Ukrainian drones out of the sky. So essentially you've got drones jousting drones for aerial supremacy. If I wrote that in a book, people were like, "Yeah, right." But I mean, it works. If it works, it works, right? And then, of course, there's the famous one during COVID in Japan. Apparently, some of the drug operations were using drones to move merchandise because everyone was locked in. So then the Japanese police started using drones with nets to capture the drones with the drugs. And then it ended up with a back and forth of escalating technology on the drones to combat the other sides. I think at some point in time, it was just two nerds that were having fun with the technology, and everything else sort of became irrelevant because it got more and more ludicrous with what they were trying. But I remember following that.
I mean, that's quite the jousting drones is hilarious, really.
But if
but that image itself is quite too
right. And if I had written that just 4 years ago, you know what I mean? Like people are like, "Oh, come on, JR, that's just stupid." Mm-hmm. But it really happened. Then again, I've used events from history in books and had people tell me it's unbelievable, and I'm like, "Well, tell that to Bob over here. That was his life. I stole it from him." Sometimes fact is truly stranger than fiction. Right. All right, and last but certainly not least, we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. We are no longer knuckle-dragging troglodytes. So, coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
That's a great question, because it's morning over here right now. I've been drinking my coffee in a giant Medusa mug. This is probably a liter mug, and when you run your ad spot, I'm probably going to take a 1-minute bathroom break and come back if that's okay with you. But I would choose coffee. I like my coffee generally, anyway, like I like my liquor, but the newest kind of thing, the newest twist on coffee here is quite bizarre. It's a orange juice coffee. Hot is a bit weird, but iced coffee on a hot day, it's like iced coffee with a 30% orange juice in it. It's refreshing, and it feels like you're doing two things at once. It appeals to the side of me that wants to be productive, I'm getting vitamin C. I'm waking up. I got one drink. I feel like if I can do that all day, I'll get 2 books done instead of 1.
So, okay. I'm interested. Okay. So like, I was shocked when people were like, no, adding butter to coffee actually is good. The keto coffee. Like I wouldn't have thought it. So you just add iced coffee to OJ equal mix and you drink it?
Basically, I mean, you can get it as a hot coffee too, but the hot coffee is a bit sour. It's a bit weird, which is what I'm doing now because it's actually a little bit chilly. We've had a hot period the last week or so, and it's a bit chilly this morning. So I haven't gone for the iced coffee yet. Maybe after the break, I'll switch it up. But yeah, you make like a black iced coffee, and then put like 30-40% orange juice into it, and it's an acquired taste. I think the first time you try it, it's a bit like orange juice after brushing your teeth, but then it's kind of clicks. It's good.
I'll have to try it and report back, dear listener, and tell us if you've tried it either.
The other one, can I give you one more?
Sure.
There's a famous kind of brand here in China, in Chongqing anyway, which is like this secret 34 million cyberpunk super city most people have never heard of. I never heard of it before. I got a free trip to come here, and I've been here a dozen years. It just sucked me in. It's weird. You can Google that. Check it out, Chongqing documentary. It's got a train that goes through a commercial residential building. It's really bizarre. But they had another one. So Lucky Coffee is kind of like or Luckin Coffee is like a Starbucks local kind of clone or ripoff or whatever. But they had this Mao Tai, like famous prince liquor latte. And they put a couple drops of like a very expensive liquor into their coffee. And so if my cousin came back from Seattle, he met a girl from a nearby city, Chengdu, and he came to visit me, and they brought me this bottle. It's like a 3,000 RMB, maybe like 400 US bottle of liquor. I just kept it next to my coffee machine, and friends were coming by and say, "Hey, you want one of those liquor coffees?" I use the Chinese word. They say, "Sure," and they would be expecting a drop. I put a full shot in. And they'd be like, "Whoa, this is something." But when I was actually writing my book, the Sun Also Rises on Cthulhu, I would get up, especially Sunday mornings, and I would have like a couple seriously strong liquor lattes and try to channel the spirit of Ernest Hemingway. And it was in that kind of malleable, caffeinated, and lucid, and a bit drunk state that I kind of tried to find my own Hemingway. So that's a bit of a tie into the new book.
I will get with you after the show to get a link to that documentary, and we'll throw it in the thing if anyone's interested. Explore the world from your comfort of your couch.
Yeah.
So the orange juice coffee, I'll definitely try. So how did you, before we do the commercial, let's talk about your history of nerddom. So how did you get into reading, and then how did you make that transition from I want to read all the content to I want to make it myself?
I mean, that's a good question. I remember being about 12 years old. So I was allergic to cigarettes, even though I smoked as a teen and a kind of 20-year-old for a while. I was actually allergic to cigarettes. So nobody knew this for several years, which meant I was getting all kinds of ear infections, ear, nose, and throat infections as a child, like 8 to 12 or 13. I just got sick a lot because people smoked around me, and then my head went like. So what happened was I ended up missing a lot of school as a primary school student. And I'd stay home. I'd have the TV. I'd have a bowl of ice cream. And I read books like Stephen King's The Stand, It, V.N.R. Kuntz, a lot of these scares, some Lovecraft, and a lot of fantasy, a lot of sci-fi. So I would always be catching up during the week in school. Oh, I missed 5 days. I got to get a project done, all this math homework to catch up on. But at home, I was like, I just read a 1,000-page book, and I'm like 11 years old. So I was like way ahead of my class in terms of reading. And I just was always really interested in stories. I loved movies, TV, video games, and reading books. And at some point, I just kind of I think I was about 12 when I started writing my own kind of short stories. But I never, until recently, had the discipline to finish them, to publish them. So for years, I kind of just had these binders with drafts and 30 or 50 pages. I do 100 pages and then get painted into a corner and think, oh, I kind of broke this one and forget about it. And it was actually only during 2020 when I suddenly was locked up, and I was right in the city next to that first city in China, Wuhan. I was 800 kilometers west of that. And everyone was saying, oh no, we're going to get hit. And this might be the end of you. And I had my Hemingway and Kilimanjaro kind of moment. I thought, oh my God, I've been taking writing classes for like 30 years, university and creative writing, master classes online. And I don't have a bloody thing published. And I just started writing at a feverish pace. And that's kind of how I ended up with about 8 books done in 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's one way to do it. All right. So was there anything you think that other than just growing up with health issues that kept you reading, was there any other moment that you think would be pivotal to you as a creative?
Reading? Well, the interesting thing, I think a lot of us, I don't know if you read as much as you used to read as a young person. I certainly don't. And I wish I did. And I try to. And I could, minute for minute, when I could focus, I'm sure I can read as well as I used to. But it's just the focus now is the problem. Like when I was a kid, I could read a few novels a week. I remember, here's the thing, I'm about to brag, but it's a nerdy brag. When I was in grade 6, my English was quite good. My math was okay. I was in primary school, and about once a week, I think we had an enrichment gifted Thursday afternoon. And my regular teacher, Miss Delbrook, rest in peace, I suppose. I think she's pretty old now. She somehow resented me because I was both a joker and a class clown. But half a day every week, they'd take me out and put me in like special math, special English. And I came back. And I think if I was like a goody two shoes, she would have respected that. But because I was a brat and I was funny and I was a clown, she just thought I was like arrogant, or I thought maybe my other English teacher is better than her. So when I had to go to grade 7, she made the recommendation of advanced English or regular English. And I was in the regular English class. And remember, my teacher was named Mrs. Cherry, and she had a list, the advanced English reading list and a regular English reading list. And I made it a point to read about 3 books a week that year. And I carried my class. I probably read like about 90% of my class's reading list. And we beat the gifted English class. And I basically read more than the whole gifted English class that year. And I was proud of that. I read a lot. And nowadays, I don't know, I work and I watch movies with my wife, and we play video games there's just so many ways to experience story now that I think it's harder for readers and writers. So if you can read with that same dedication, it's really amazing, because the world is pulling your focus all the time, isn't it?
So that was true for me as well. Recently, probably right around the time 2019, right before COVID kicked in, I finally started getting serious about getting back in shape and getting healthier. It's been a long process, but as part of that, I listened to I started with podcasts, but I would listen while I would go for my walks, because to distract yourself from how much it sucks to push yourself. And then probably about 2021, I switched to audiobooks. And so that's where I get most of my reading now.
Mm-hmm.
And it is distracting. And I found I actually walk more when it's a book versus just a podcast. Because I enjoy the history podcast and I enjoy the political podcasts, but they don't suck you in the way a good fiction story can, right? And so I found some of the authors, I'll be like, oh, okay, I got to know. I only listen to the book while I'm walking, which means there are times when I want to know what happens next and I don't want to wait, where I just walk a few extra laps. Yeah. And so that's how I do my listening now. And I sort of pair it as the reward for doing the exercising. Cool. And that's the only way I was able to get it back to where it was as a kid. And I'm sure if there's narrators listening, they're going to hate me, but I tend to listen to the book on 1.25 speed. Mm-hmm. So like I can, cut a little bit of time off of the 40-hour book is now like 37, something crazy. Don't ask me for the math, people. But I get through reading now that way, although it is pricey because audiobooks ain't cheap.
Yeah. But, do you do any subscriptions like audiobooks.com or Audible or whatever? Sometimes they offer like 3 or 4 free books.
So I do the Audible subscription for the $1 a month. I get some of them through authors that'll sell direct on BookFunnel, because sometimes you can get cheaper books that way. Or Audiobook Guild also sells directly through BookFunnel. Cool. Some of the individual authors I know sell that way for their audiobooks. And for that one, I do the BookFunnel. And then we interviewed... I can't remember the name of the guy, but we just recently did him. It was Richard Sparks. There we go. We interviewed Richard Sparks, and he put me in touch with this program called Downpour, which is also for audiobooks. So now I'm kind of diversifying, because where possible, I don't want to give all of my money to Amazon. I'd prefer, to kind of diversify to other platforms too, to support content across the board. So. But since you had to step away for a second, I'm going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about this book.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that sounds great.
The government underestimated the outbreak. The best medicines couldn't stop it. Now, the dead are walking the streets, and they're hungry. Zombie Patient Zero is 9 tales of flesh-ripping, brain-splattering mayhem from Bayonet Books, the boldest name in action and horror anthologies. From deep space to luxury resorts, nowhere is safe. Zip up your hazmat suit and dare to find out how it all went wrong. Zombie Patient Zero, from the deranged minds that brought you Contact This and Storming Area 51. Pick up your copy today in paperback or Kindle.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. And so we've got Mr. Jorah Kai with us. Like you said, sometimes you can drink too much water and too much tea, and you got to do what you got to do. So now that we've got you here to talk about The Sun Also Rises with Cthulhu, let's start with where would you rate this if like parents are listening and want to know if it's appropriate for their kid?
Well, I started watching movies like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street when I was about 8. So if you're anything like me, not a problem at all. If you are more concerned with what your children are reading, I mean, there's some graphic, violent monster attack kind of scene, but it's my wife, for example, when she watches a movie with a monster murderer, she'll just go, "Oh yeah, that's not real." So I'm not really that scared. I don't know. It's a good question. There is some violence. There is some chewing. There is some, descriptions of blood. So maybe it's good to be over 12, I guess, or at least if you believe your kids have nerves of steel and enjoy reading horror, then it doesn't really matter. I read it and, The Stand and that kind of stuff about 11 years old. So I think it's probably good for most kids, but if they're very sensitive and you don't want them to be exposed to any kind of violence, then maybe wait a little bit.
Okay. So where did you come up with the premise for this story? Like, how did the idea come to you?
Yeah. It's a kind of a long story, but I'm in China here. I'm a teacher, and I've got a buddy who's from Georgia, and he was teaching this class called the Hemingway course, and he taught people, journalists and just regular people that want to improve their writing with The Old Man and the Sea. And he actually just hit me up and asked me if I wanted to help basically edit their essays. And I had so much fun. I went over the top giving like lots and lots of creative feedback on these essays. And he just thought, wow, like, let's do this course together. You have a lot of enthusiasm for talking about Old Man and the Sea. And we ended up doing it for a year or two with many, many different small groups, using Old Man and the Sea as a way to teach writing and subtext and iceberg theory of omission and all that kind of Hemingway stuff. And I kind of just got really into it. And I had, so basically my professional writing career, I had done this diary when the pandemic hit, and it turned into 3 books. And then I got tired of my friends reading virus and death nonfiction to their kids and stuff. So I wrote a book called Amos the Amazing, which is kind of like a solar punk sci-fi fantasy. It's a little bit like if you took the world of Blade Runner or something, and then put like something like Alice in Wonderland or Chinese Harry Potter inside it, in kind of a multi-world exploration. So it's kind of a weird twist, but it was just kind of fun. It's kind of a fun book compared to what I was writing before that. I actually got it traditionally published in China in the Chinese language. I got a contract deal, and they've spent years. So I self-published it with my one. So we have a micro imprint on Amazon, Drafter Digital, and all those major platforms in 2022. And it's got a traditional deal here in China for Chinese language. And they wanted a second one, and I actually have notes to have several. And I thought I wanted to be a better writer. I mean, not to say I don't think I'm not a good writer, but I thought I want to be more mature. The first one was very bombastic, lots of adjectives. And when I was teaching Hemingway, I thought Ernest would just he'd shake his head, say, "Kai, did you really write that sentence? You got 3 adjectives in a row there. That's some crap. Cut all of them. You don't need any adjectives." So when I thought of how to write better, again, as a young man, I went from being like a super fantasy sci-fi nerd comic book fan to I got involved in the rave scene as a kid. I was a DJ. I played festivals. I was out all night doing crazy stuff. And Hunter S. Thompson was actually kind of a role model for me. That's how I got into journalism. Sort of gonzo journalist for Rolling Stone magazine, followed around Hell's Angels bikers and all kinds of weird stuff. He was popularly portrayed by Bill Murray and then Johnny Depp. When I was young, Johnny Depp, of course, was kind of an icon, right? A very iconic roles. And his Hunter S. Thompson was pretty classic. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, 1994, I think. So Hunter Thompson, I figured out by doing research onto him, actually used to copy entire Hemingway novels on a typewriter. And his friends would say, Hunter, you can go buy this book for a couple of dollars. What are you doing? And he said he wanted to feel this immense power of Hemingway's tight style kind of go through his hands, into his brain, through his eyes, out his heart, through his body. And when he started writing, people said this is like a psychedelic version of Ernest Hemingway. You've got all this power of Hemingway, but you've got your own take on it, your own voice. So I started writing this book as a way to, actually, I originally started with The Old Man and the Sea. And then I realized it was not public domain. And I checked and thought, well, is any of them public domain? And The Sun Also Rises became public domain in 2022, around when I was starting to write this. And I thought, well, imagine I could redo this with a twist. And when I was in college, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies was something I had to read. Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen is in a literary course as an English major. And then somebody said, have you seen it this way? And he threw the copy of And Zombies at me. And I thought, you could just do that? This is crazy. It was really funny. It was hilarious. And then it became a movie that I enjoyed in the 2000s. So I started writing it as a creative writing exercise, with the idea being to tone down my style, to try to trim my writing, to try to mature a bit. So when I come back to another fantasy novel, it feels more grown up, a little more restrained. And somewhere along the way, I actually thought I may be able to pull it off. And when I got the name, The Sun Also Rises on Cthulhu, I thought, well, that's kind of catchy, actually. If I could actually do it, it might be pretty cool. And along the way, the book got finished. Amazon at one point banned our publishing account. There was a couple of days. It was the day after the election, I think. And again, not to get political, but the election happened one day, whether you liked it or didn't like it. And then the next day, we got an email and said, you're trying to pull some nonsense on us. Your Amazon account is banned. 6 of my books, including the Amos one, were taken offline. They said, any royalties we owe you, we're not paying you, you, bad man, you. And then we had to write like a legal letter to explain public domain law, the Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And we had to go through this whole odyssey. And then about a week later, they said, oh yeah, you're right. We were wrong. Everything's back. No problem. So just even getting it published, a lot of people thought, like, you can't bring back Hemingway, but we did it.
It's public domain, so you can use it. Did you have to give him credit on the cover because you're reimagining it?
You probably didn't have to. I don't think you have to do anything. You can kind of do whatever you want when it's public domain. But I wanted to follow the idea of the if you check out Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, it's by Jane Austen and Seth Graham Greene, I think. I've got it on my shelf somewhere. He just gave Jane Austen that first author billing, I think probably to get some recognition, because I don't know if Seth has written a lot of books past that, but that was his kind of flash in the pan or one hit wonder. I think there's a couple of them in that universe, actually. It just made more sense to give Hemingway the first billing, because it's in many ways, it's a similar book. There are whole sections of the bull riding that, I didn't change everything. I like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. There's whole scenes that are the romance with Mr. Darcy and all that. And then the zombies come in. But where I thought you could have a lot of fun was like the subtext in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. In Pride and Prejudice, there's a military camp nearby the colonial house, and they never explain why. And Mr. Darcy's an officer, and he shows up. Whereas in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, it's very clear that the army is close by because of the zombies. So they take what was already there and give it like this new twist. And to me, that was kind of the fun. The Sun Also Rises was Hemingway was a medic, and he served in the Spanish Civil War. And so in the Lost Generation, they called that, like in the 1920s, a lot of Americans were in Paris and around Europe, kind of floating around, kind of stunned or shell-shocked after what they had been through, and trying to find meaning. So it's a really existential novel, his novel published in 1926, The Sun Also Rises. And I thought, well, what if you take his ennui, his existential, what is life really about? Maybe it's about nothing and all this kind of despair. And you add like a cosmic insignificance of Cthulhu. You're sort of pairing an inner conflict with an outer conflict, and in many ways they mirror each other. So I thought there was kind of an interesting pairing there.
And now your name is forever on the book cover with Ernest Hemingway,
which is pretty cool. A lot of people thought I was totally nuts, and Amazon, said I was basically a criminal and tried to sue me. But the law was in my favor. We had a good entertainment lawyer consult on that. The great thing is president, I guess, right? Legal president. I said, if you're can you please explain to me how this book is different than Pride and Prejudice and Zombies? So you're either going to take down a Hollywood movie and a book with thousands of positive reviews, or you're going to explain the difference, which there isn't any, or you're going to let mine slide, which they did. So that was cool. It worked out well. It started as a writing exercise, and it ended up kind of how I hoped it would. But there was a lot of time in between where I thought, this may be a huge wasted effort, but it was never a wasted effort, because if I was getting to be a better writer, if I was getting to learn from Hemingway, then I would be a better writer, whether it ever got published or not. But the fact that it's a book people can enjoy now, and I have the ebook, the audio book, paperback, and hardcover. The audiobook was a virtual voice, which is probably a bit controversial, but for people with low vision or ADHD, it's better than nothing. And if I can find 50 hours, I'll go voice it myself one day, maybe this summer.
Yeah, I've got some. On the one hand, I can't stand the virtual voice when it comes to like just the quality and the tonality, and like you can tell, like they can't tell the difference between live and live, for instance. But I also happen to know that some of my readers are elderly, and they don't see the screen as well. So the idea of them being able to listen to it before I can do it, so I've got mixed feelings on that. I've thought about that as well. Yeah. Or if there are options for people where it's an impairment, not just whatever. Yeah, I'm not sure how that works, but I appreciate, like you're saying, that it makes it accessible.
As an accessibility option, I think it's pretty good. Although, like with my Amos the Amazing Fantasy book, I found a narrator, Christian Neal, British guy. We worked together. We did the book. He's a human narrator, and I'm really proud of it. People really like it. He's a great voice actor. But it took us months of back and forth, and it was kind of expensive for an indie author to take on that goal. I'd love to do my own as well, but the time is a huge thing. So, for this one, yeah, maybe one day I'll get to do it myself, or I'll find the right narrator. But for accessibility, I think it's kind of cool just to have it out there. My dad's a bit older as well. His eyes are kind of get tired, and he was reading the book, but he listened to the whole thing on Audible, and he said he really enjoyed it that way. And when he's exercising, and it made me happy.
Absolutely. Now, with this one, like I like some of the stuff that's coming in the public domain and being reused and reimagined. They turned Winnie the Pooh into a slasher fic, for instance. I have not seen it, but just the idea appeals to me. So, and I'm familiar with the Cthulhu lore, the Lovecraftian lore. I actually think a lot of the people that reimagined his vision did a better job than his original vision. I don't like his prose, although some of that's product of the time. How much of the writing style in this one is Ernest Hemingway, and how much of it is Jorah Kai?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's the first time I've co-written a novel. Now, this is not the same kind of co-written as if we wrote a novel together, because you're another living person, but I did do my best to co-write with Hemingway. So some of it is a very distinctively Hemingway voice, and some of it is very creatively me, but I tried to kind of pair them together. There were moments where, I spent some time trying to really get into the mindset of Hemingway. I'm not a witch doctor of any sort. I guess one path could have been the seance and that sort of idea, to raise the spirit of Hemingway, the grumpy ghost. I did sort of a digital incarnation of that, where I actually fed all of his books into an AI and talked to him, not to write the book, but to just say, I'm doing this, and be the voice of Hemingway. And what do you think of it? And he said, damn it, kid, let me go back to bed. It was quite creepy. There was moments I was drinking my liquor coffee on a Sunday morning with like a blanket over my head, typing, giving my pages to the ghost of a resurrected digital Hemingway. And he just told me to leave him alone. And I kind of I wore it down. Now, there is a good question of, would I have worn down the real ghost of Hemingway or the real Hemingway the same way? Or was there a limit to the resistance that a virtual Hemingway, did it break down too easily? But I did take some pride in the fact that initially this ghost of Hemingway absolutely hated the idea. And I gave him pages and I gave him pages and I talked about how there's a connection and that the spirit is the same and it's just a new face to it. And then I ended up getting this response letter that it gave me goosebumps. And I thought, like, I feel like, no, I mean, it's not real, of course, I know, but it's as close as I think any living person my age that would ever come to talking to Ernest Hemingway. I can't imagine a way you get any closer other than a seance, if you believe in that kind of stuff, that actually used that letter as the forward to the reader from Ernest Hemingway. It was kind of created by me, and that's the only part that was kind of also created by a ghost of Hemingway, if that makes any sense. But it did give me goosebumps as the way that Hemingway talked about this collaboration.
Yeah, I thought at one point in time you were going to throw a joke out there about a Ouija board.
Yeah, well, I don't, I want people to be able to think about it however they want. If they want to think of me as a digital mystic that was using a Ouija board, then definitely that definitely was involved in there. I don't want to speak about it conclusively, but I like the idea. So much of this book is sort of playing with concepts. Hemingway's concept of the meaning of life, and is there more to life than drinking in a bar and trying to get laid after a war leaves you, unable to consummate, and all that kind of stuff. That was Hemingway's issues for his character, and that expressed his own feelings after Spanish Civil War and all that. And then I added, Cthulhu to it and those ideas. I don't want to spoil the book, but there are people who dealing with their own mortality and what lengths they will go to try to extend their life and the kind of evil things they could do. And I think a lot of it can be a metaphor. And then even towards the end, they're trying to break the fourth wall, talk about something called the dark beyond, and bring questions of what existence really means, what it's all about. And I like the idea that it's a bit messy and a bit wild and a bit mad. Kind of Hemingway through the lens of Hunter Thompson, through the lens of me, with a Cthulhu Lovecraft kind of twist. And I also tried to kind of modernize it a bit, because both Hemingway and Lovecraft's prose 100 years ago is maybe a little bit racist. And so I tried to keep all of the best aspects of the writing and the creative monsters and all that without using any language that is explicitly, not appropriate for 2025.
Yeah, and sensibilities and what is considered normal or acceptable change. And some of the terms that back then wouldn't even been considered racist, it was just descriptive, are now we're like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't use those words.
Yeah.
So I can see where that would be a delicate thing to balance. I know Hemingway was an ambulance driver for the Red Cross in World War I in Italy. I know his Spanish Civil War time, he was actually there as a war correspondent, but he was a war correspondent in World War II as well, which I wasn't aware of until I prepped for this show. In fact, he was one of the correspondents at D-Day in the Battle of the Bulge.
That's wild, isn't it? He had quite a life. He was even in Chongqing, China. He was here. He traveled Africa, Cuba. A lot of the stuff he wrote about was really autobiographical in a sense, right?
The thing I find fascinating is, so the piece of shrapnel that the Austrian government sent his way, he kept as a souvenir, including some of the bullet fragments that missed him. But landed in something, he'd dig them out until he had a coin purse full of the mortar that hit him and all the near misses that he could gather up, that he carried them with him the entire rest of his life.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Which I get, like I've kept pieces of the mortar that almost got me, so I get the sentiment. It's a reminder of your mortality, but guy led an interesting life. The old joke is, if you want to be authentic with your writing, you got to cut your wrist and bleed onto the page. Is kind of the Hemingway approach.
Yeah, for sure.
When you added the Lovecraft, how much of this is the modern reinterpretation of Lovecraft, and how much of this are you pulling from his original source material?
Like I don't think I'd say mostly it's his original source material through my modern reinterpretation in a sense. So I'm not like binging Lovecraft Country to write this, but I did read a lot of Lovecraft. But a lot of it is open source too. There was a lot of his contemporaries that built upon that. Like whereas Hemingway is now public domain, at least this book, Sun Also Rises, as of 2022, January 1st was public domain. Lovecraft stuff was always public domain. He encouraged people to write his monsters and the mythos and that kind of stuff, as just to be free and to play with it. And so some people think his writing, he was a very racist guy, or he just thought of outsiders. He had a very narrow view of who his people were, and almost everybody was like scary and weird. And although that might be problematic today, it did create a sort of creative universe that was very strange. And this idea, what was his famous quote? The strongest human emotion is fear, and the greatest fear is fear of the unknown. Which, when you pair that with Hemingway's writing style of less is more and the iceberg theory, where you've only got like 1/7 of the story on the page and so much is happening kind of below. When it works well, it's the idea it creates like a living universe, and you're getting a story, but there's a whole story that you have to kind of squint and look around the corner and kind of get more into. I think Hemingway pairs really surprisingly well with Lovecraft and with horror, with that iceberg idea where less is more and the unknown is always kind of lurking. So some of the reviews I've had have been really, really positive and said, it's a bit of a slow burn, more than they expected. I don't know why. I guess maybe they didn't read the original. The original was really a very slow burn kind of novel, but it kind of is an existential horror. And people seem to enjoy it, which is always nice, because I was happy to write it, whether or not people liked it. But the fact that people seem to like it is a bonus.
Okay. Now, did you keep the two main characters? So Lady Brett Ashby and was it Jake Barnes?
Jake Barnes.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read The Sun Also Rises.
Yeah, no, so Brett, yes, I kept Brett as she was. I renamed Jake as to Jack. I gave him a Prussian name. Some people, again, this is a bit controversial. His name in my story is Jack Schitt, Shitt.
Okay.
And he's the love interest is Michael Hawk. So yeah, I changed a couple of the names, and it's worked in quite organically in several chapters. Like it's a Prussian American name. It is a real last name. There's a Canadian show called Schitt's Creek, which is very playful, tongue in cheek. They're the Schitt family, and they're very rich, and they end up losing all their money, and they have to go to this small town, and it's absolutely horrible, kind of fish out of water comedy story. So perhaps that is some Monty Pythonian kind of influence. Like it's very sarcastic and sardonic in a sense. But I think the idea, when I read the story, and it was really the original Sun Also Rises. I mean, Jake is really, he drinks all the time, and he wonders what the meaning of life is other than being drunk, and he loves this woman that he cannot commit to, and she loves him, but he can't please her in the way she needs to be pleased. So he watches her parade around with all these other men that have the one thing that he can't because of his injury of war. And I thought, well, he sort of feels like Jack Schitt, doesn't he? Maybe that's his real name.
That's a deep twist.
Right? It's kind of a stupid twist that is a deep twist, isn't it? Right.
But it's also the thing all men fear. Like the old, like it's in every war movie you've ever seen. They got injured. The first thing to do is check their junk. Like that,
right.
that trope exists because it's true. Like
know that.
We got given armor that was uncomfortable to wear sometimes. So you'd find a lot of the guys, they didn't worry about protecting their, whatever. They would take the armor, tape it to the seats in a way that it would protect their reproductive organs, shall we say. Yeah. So I like that he played on that in the original and that you kept it. Do they ever, in your version of it, because they don't in the original, diagnose the cause? Because, now we know more about that kind of stuff. Or did you leave the medicine understanding to what it was in 1926 when he was writing this?
Yeah, well, I kind of twisted it because I'm adding a Lovecraftian. I don't want to spoil anything explicitly, but because I'm adding occult and Lovecraftian ideas, I actually kind of played it up as not just an injury of war, but like a bit of a curse. There was a Spanish señorita. There's a bit of an occult twist. And also, so Jake's best friend, in my book, Jack's best friend was Robert Cohen. And in my book, also, he got a bit of a makeover. He's Robert Cthulhu, which is a bit of like a mouthful, a bit of a Cthulhuian mouthful. And so he is kind of he's a blue-blooded character, again, from sort of the Lovecraft country of the U.S., but also has this kind of a deep one ancestry and is sort of intimately tied to Naharlothrotep. There are all these mouthfuls, right? All these words. There are different sort of vying Lovecraftian cosmic forces at play, and the humans are sort of a cosmic insignificance. And that's something that I tried to keep, even though this book is something a little different. It's part of, I think, what made Hemingway's book meaningful to him, was sort of trying to find significance in an insignificant world, whether it was with gaudy pleasures or whatever, just kind of getting through the day, being day drunk and smiling at the pretty girl that you can't really love and watching her go off and make you jealous day after day. And whereas in this new version, you've got all of that, plus there are sinister forces, sinister causes, and dark things in the night.
Okay, so in the original, it ends with a conversation. I think it was in a taxi or some sort of vehicle, and Brett tells Jake something to the effect of, "We could have had something beautiful," implying that had he not been injured, they could have made beautiful life together. And him basically saying it's nice to think that, at least. Did you keep that kind of fade to a whimper ending, or did you give it something more substantial?
Well, yes and no. In one sense, I think that was instrumental, but there is always, because of the occult and horror and cosmic forces, there is an underlying tension underneath all of that, and other forces and stuff like that. But I also have an epilogue that jumps time about 100 years and kind of keeps the universe active in a sense. That's a little bit strange. And I'm actually kind of toying with using that as a lead into a sci-fi novel or trilogy that I'm hoping to have out by 2028. So I've got a couple of things to work on first and then get back to kind of using that. So I've got some notes that were interesting and kind of sometimes I read these science articles and they inspire ideas. So we were talking about that in the pre-show, who inspires who? Is it the engineers that inspire the authors, or the authors that inspire the engineers? And sometimes it's both. But sometimes I read these articles about weird physics or science theories and try to think about how I could bring that into a Lovecraftian sci-fi futuristic universe. And I've got a couple of weird ideas where this book, actually, 1926, Paris and Pamplona, Spain, is kind of like the seed. The epilogue is 2025, the bridge, and then maybe in 3 or 4 years I'll have kind of something that's playing off that, using very weird science and dark cosmic forces to create a whole new book.
So have you thought about maybe tying it into, what is it, that War of the Worlds type vibe?
War of the Worlds, maybe a Brave New World kind of vibe, something between the two, maybe, yeah.
I'm just thinking that could work because, one, it's public domain as well, and two, like, that never got a satisfactory sequel. And what if it wasn't aliens, but it was elder gods, right?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I want to be careful, though, when I did this, not only just because of the legal hectic of publishing a Hemingway book, which was quite substantial for me and my publishing partner and all that, but also don't really want to be the guy that writes just book after book with famous dead authors. So if I was ever to do it again, I would probably want to give it a bit of time and have at least a few more solo books under my own name, because there's something really seductive about reinterpreting books, but I don't think I want to be the person that just does that all the time. But it was really interesting as a writing exercise. I think it was kind of like what Hunter S. Thompson used to do to build his chops, but with a whole creative. He never published any of that. That was just his practice. I actually got to publish my practice and turn it into a new story, which is pretty neat.
I think this speaks to all of the frustrated English majors that were reading this and be like, well, what would it be like if I made my twist? So I get the allure of it. I see what you're saying. You don't want to be pigeonholed, essentially, as only this. You want to be able to do more than this. Mm-hmm. When you did your reimagining of The Sun Also Rises, and then you threw in the Lovecraft angle, Did you keep the tie that Lovecraft did to the New England area? Was like one of the characters from New England, or just
the best friend of my main character, the Robert character, had this kind of rich New England background, but he was also kind of as Howard would say, a bit squamous. He had large, unblinking eyes, kind of a fish-like kind of gaze, and although his family was a real kind of blue blood family, very kind of wealthy upper class family, there was this rumors of a mysterious origin, and elder gods or deep one fish people kind of involved in the so I tried to play with some of that stuff. And
so was the best friend your addition, or was this potentially Mike, which was Lady Brett's?
No, the Robert character, the boxer.
Okay.
In the original Hemingway story, apparently Hemingway had written about 20 pages that he cut. So there's a couple of great, I teach English, I teach writing to adults, to children, to journalists sometimes as well. And so Hemingway's got a couple of great lines, to find that one true sentence is one of them. And another one being, like you said, the first draft of everything is shit and writing is easy. You just sit there and put one word after another until you bleed, which is the mastery part of it. But so apparently, the first sentence being that Robert Cohen was the middleweight boxing champion of Princeton was like the middle of chapter 2 or 3 of his book. And it became the first sentence of chapter 1 of the original book, because apparently he just went through and he said, nope, 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 nope. And then he got to that sentence and he said, that feels true. Okay, that's the beginning of my book. I think so. He cut the first 15 or 20 pages until that moment. So it's kind of interesting because the book is mostly about Jake and my book, Jack, but it also kind of almost journalistically starts with his best friend and an analysis of this guy as a boxer, as a boxing champion, and as a weird character, and then eventually kind of comes back to Robert and the main character sitting down in Paris years later and talking about their life. So it's a little bit hard to follow even sometimes, because it jumps around like that. But Robert was an interesting character, and his boxing did come in handy, and he's definitely a bit strange.
Did you keep the Romero, the Pompadour, I think is what you call the guy that did the bowls and stuff? Did that
Matador, Pedro Romero. Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. I kept a lot of, all the main characters. I just twisted them a little bit. Maybe a couple of them I changed their names or their looks or their background a little bit. But no, to me the bones were really good bones. I kind of tried to think about the Pride and Prejudice and zombies. To think the story itself is it's a great American novel. It's Hemingway's first great novel, they say. There's nothing bad about it. I'm trying to say that I was going to make Hemingway's great novel better is kind of pretentious. So my goal was just not to screw it up, not to F it up too badly. If I could finish it and put it out and someone could read it, if they'd never read Hemingway and they thought it was cool, I didn't F it up and it was a pretty good book. And some of the beta readers I had were like, I have a friend, Randy, who's from Missouri, and he's 75-year-old retired professor who, he read his first Hemingway book when Hemingway was still alive, basically, and he's a huge Hemingway fan, and he read it. He said, it's uncanny how you nailed the voice. It feels like something Hemingway could have done today. I'm not a big fan of horror. I don't know much about horror. Ask somebody else about that. But the Hemingway part, you got that. And I thought, okay, cool. It's like a real
Hemingway didn't die until the 60s. So,
Yeah. And that's kind of too sad. When I teach Old Man and the Sea, is a different note. This was Hemingway's first great book. Sun Also Rises. I guess the Old Man and the Sea was maybe his last great book. That was an instant classic, won the Nobel Prize and the Pulitzer. But I feel like after he had done a few things and taken time off, the few things he had done were not well received. Critics really chafed into him. Imagine being a young man, in your 20s, and you write a book and they say, wow, you're the second greatest American novelist after Mark Twain, or the second meaningful one. He had to carry that on his shoulders, being this great American writer for decades. And then as an older man, they kind of started saying, yeah, whatever he had is gone. It's just, he's lost it all, and he's not there. And I think he chomped on that for a while. And then he wrote Old Man and the Sea as a way to talk about an old man that could have had a lot of bad luck and a real dry spell. But once you're a champion, you're always a champion, and never give up. And always, if you had it once, you can always, at least one more time, pull it out of the fire and be that again. And I think that's what The Old Man and the Sea is kind of about. But I think also, if you think about those sharks that ate the fish, to me, those sharks were his middle finger to the critics, Because if you think about an artist, someone who would disappear for years at a time, come back with a movie or an album, a music album, or some great painting or something, and they kind of go off on their own. It's almost like going into the ocean and you're away from society. And when they come back with their piece of art, it's almost like coming back to the global village and saying, I've got this big fish for you all to fill your belly, or, to fill your Netflix binge weekend, or whatever it is, to fill something in the human spirit that needs to be filled. And how many times do critics kind of get between the artist and the village and say, skip this one. It's some crap. And maybe ruin it before the people get to really enjoy it. And so for Hemingway, I think he was kind of saying, watch out for the sharks, because they'll eat this fish to the bone and you're going to go hungry. And in the end, Hemingway killed himself, right? And I think maybe the critics, maybe he believed them, that he didn't have anything more to say, that he didn't have anything more to write. And I wonder, if a world where Hemingway didn't have those critics, didn't have those sharks, he would have been happy just to fish and play with his grandkids for 20 more years. Imagine one more great Hemingway book in his 80s, being able to look back with 30 more years of perspective. I kind of feel like the critics maybe stole that from us. I've never been a big fan of critics.
Yeah, for me, The Old Man and the Sea struck chords with me the same way Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller did. They kind of felt like the same kind of idea. You're only as good as your last sale kind of vibe. Like, nobody cares, work harder. A look at masculinity in a consumer age. So I those ones are good ones. It'd be interesting when those hit public domain, what people do with them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you have the potential to do it really wrong, to do it dirty, yeah. or maybe to do it well. I think if you can put a creative twist on it, and zombies and Cthulhu, or something else that honors the original, but then gives it new life. And maybe some people, my goal would be that people that have never read Hemingway would maybe read this one and think, hey, I kind of like what was going on here. Maybe I'll actually just read the original or read more Hemingway. There are probably young readers who have never experienced Hemingway's writing, and maybe this book would actually be a way for them to look into the past. And I think, if someone's looking at doing a creative reimagining like that, they could think about that as an option too, not just to make a cool twist on a book, which is cool enough on its own, but to honor the original and to maybe lead new readers back to stuff that might be kind of too old for them, and actually kind of open that book back up to a new audience.
Okay, so where do you fit in the Lovecraftian elder god monster angle other than just the best friend? Is there other ways where you fit that into the story arc? Is it something that sort of culminates at the end? Is it something that's going throughout the story?
No, it's definitely going throughout the story, but it's a bit of a slow burn, and it does culminate for sure. And in a way that's kind of parallel to Call of Cthulhu, the original Lovecraft story, which is, it's a short story, but it's quite one of his most famous ones. Cthulhu probably being Lovecraft's most famous elder god monster. He's actually a priest for the real, like Azathoth and all these other Yog-Sothoth, like the sleeping super gods. Cthulhu is actually kind of like this sort of intermediary that's supposed to come and wake up the real pantheon, right, in the Lovecraftian mythos. And so that's all honored. But I've got, so interesting. I was on the new version of Twitter, Blue Sky, playing with some of the fantasy, sci-fi, and horror picks of the week, and there's some interesting stuff where writers kind of say, pick a, and one of the kind of memes that we were playing with was cast your novel with actors. And I was trying to think about who the main four would be that would kind of fit well with my novel. And I did this actually after I had finished and published the book. So I think in some ways for writers, it may be useful to do that while you're writing the book. But it was fun to do that for me after I actually picked an older Johnny Depp as the creepy Bill Gorton, because I've always liked Johnny Depp's acting, and as a young man, of course, being the Hunter Thompson in Fear and Loathing was pivotal to me finding gonzo journalism in my life, kind of where I went for many years, as traveling around and writing and that kind of stuff. But creepy Bill brings the fire too. He's looking for a way to deal with some health issues, and he ends up moving to traveling around Eastern Europe and getting involved with some disciples of Aleister Crowley and some ancient sort of occult things. So part of the fun for me was researching Hemingway writing in the 1920s would be writing about real characters, who was around. So, Pablo Picasso bumps into the novel in Paris in 1924. That was definitely something that could have happened. Having disciples of Crowley going around in Budapest and Vienna and that kind of stuff, that could have happened. Those were kind of real things. So, of course, this was 100 years ago, and I'm not 150 years old, so I had to do some research and a bit of creative imagining of the kind of characters and notable people and events that would have been happening then. And there's a lot of books. I actually have a book right here, Hemingway in Paris. I don't know if the camera's on, I could see that. So I try to do a lot of the behind the scenes stuff as well, kind of some diary journal stuff about Hemingway's life in Paris at the time when he was writing Sun Also Rises. A lot of it was autobiographical. He actually got in trouble because so many of the characters were kind of based off arguments and stuff his married friends were having. And so when the Sun Also Rises came out, he had a lot of people pissed at him because he had spilled the beans of their social life. So he wrote from his real life, and I tried to kind of honor.
Did you lean into the Lovecraft lore, or did you do as much research there, or did you just skim the broad concepts?
Well, I'm a big fan of Lovecraftian stuff. I grew up in the gaming scene as well. So we talked about Firefly earlier. I actually played Firefly as a game, Dungeons and Dragons, Amber Chronicles. Like a lot of the sci-fi fantasy stuff is like a TTRPG, like tabletop role-playing game version. Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf, all that kind of World of Darkness, and Call of Cthulhu is another version of that. So unlike Dungeons and Dragons, where you can become a very powerful wizard or fighter or something with cleric with holy magic, in Call of Cthulhu, you're kind of just like a normal person without any powers. And when you come up against these cults and death gods, you kind of just run or go insane or die or all of the above. So it's kind of a fun game that involves horror, but it kind of creatively fills in a lot of gaps because, again, a lot of the books, you kind of have to read the subtext. But if you buy the source books for Call of Cthulhu, the game, they have whole profiles on a lot of these elder gods and stuff like that. So you can get a lot of inspiration from the fantasy and gaming world too.
Okay. Is there anything about this series, because I realize we're running a bit long, is there anything about this book specifically that we didn't discuss that you think listeners and viewers need to know? Because obviously I don't want to give any spoilers, and my
most of that we're towing that line, but I think we didn't cross it too much yet.
Yeah, and I was an English major at one point in time, so like I've read a lot of this stuff. So for me, it's like revisiting academia. So I probably know more. Like it just struck my curiosity. But for those that don't, what would the main takeaway you want them to be from this novel? And then we'll bring this puppy home.
Sure. Yeah. To be honest, I had a couple of friends that said, I'm going to order The Sun Also Rises, read that, and then read your book. And I thought, well, that's a bit of an academic approach, but that's cool. And that definitely kind of fulfills the checkbox where I'm sort of bringing people back to Hemingway, people that hadn't read his book, which is kind of neat because, again, Hemingway is the master and I'm kind of the disciple in this relationship. And if somebody said, hey, I see what you did and you didn't totally screw it up, then I'd say mission accomplished because I was just trying to play with that. And so I have a pretty low bar for success there. If I've been told I haven't totally screwed up his book, and that makes me happy. If you wanted to read the original first, that's cool. But if someone just wants to pick it up, some of the critics and reviewers have said, I didn't read the original, but I really enjoyed this for the following reasons. I think you're fine just to pick it up and read it and enjoy it. And although it is a bit of historical literary fiction in the sense you're reading about people in Paris and in Spain in 1923-24, about 100 years ago, there's a lot of the sort of existential feelings and concerns some people have about various things today with wars or politics and stuff. I think there is some similarity. I think people could get something out of it. I think it's interesting. You don't have to do a lot of homework. It's not like the MCU. You don't have to watch 30 movies before you can enjoy it. Just pick it up and enjoy it. There is an audiobook version. You could just get a trial and check that out if you want to listen while you're exercising. Ebook, paperback. I have a hardcover here. I've always wanted a hardcover. This was my first hardcover book, and it's pretty neat just to feel that on a hardcover, which is it's a bit expensive, I guess, but it'll last longer. Yeah, just enjoy it. If you enjoy it, it's a scary book. It's a literary book. It's definitely a book, and I'm really proud of it.
So if you don't know, dear listener, you're not aware of Project Gutenberg. It's a project where they're basically digitizing a bunch of old books. If it's in the public domain already, they've pretty much scanned a copy in and you can get to it for free. The Sun Also Rises, because it is in the public domain, is in the Project Gutenberg library collection, meaning you can go online and read it for free. You don't even have to buy it. If you buy it online and they're selling it, chances are what they're doing is they're selling their interpretation of it with commentary so they can get away with it. But you can get a free copy. I use the Project Gutenberg to read several of the classics that are out there. I suppose I could go to my library too, but Gutenberg on the computer, I don't have to leave my couch.
Okay. I got this version too. This is a really nice version. This is called the Hemingway Library Edition. It's got a nice picture of Ernest at the back there too.
Can you show the cover again?
Yeah, it's called the Hemingway Library Edition. I believe this one is the authoritative one from his family estate. If you're interested, it's a nice hardcover as well. So if you're a real book fan, you can get them both in hardcover. Put them beside each other.
That's kind of cool. So speaking of the cover, I was going to ask you, that was my final question. Obviously, art styles have vastly changed since the 1920s. What was the inspiration for this cover, and how did you try to get a modern cover that honored the legacy of Hemingway?
Well, I with my last novel, the fantasy novel, because it was fantasy, it was a little bit like a Dungeons and Dragons, Alice in Wonderland adventure. I went to the Critical Role tabletop D&D kind of community, and I found one of their artists, Adrian Navarro from Mexico, and I got him to paint it, to draw that cover. So I wanted to do something a little bit similar and a little bit different. So I kind of looked through my contacts, and I had a friend of a friend named Jan Thornig, who is a Dutch artist. And I said, can we do something that's like a medieval Renaissance like painting, but also is very Lovecraftian and very weird, and is kind of a mix of like it looks like something that would hang in an old like a European museum, but with like a digital twist as well. And so that's what we had, a few different sketches, and I really like this one because there was a few sketches and some showed Cthulhu more definitively, and this one is a little abstract. I mean, there's Cthulhuian elements to the picture, but it's kind of got this dawn rising, and it's a bit abstract, and you kind of have these shadows fleeing like a burning Italian or Spanish European village, but it's a little more abstract, and
abstract fits the time this was set in, the time it was written and published in the 20s. So that's why I asked how you honored the inspiration, like what the process was. So this is the part of the interview, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part. It really does make a difference. I know you have mentioned you're in China right now. Are signed copies available if someone wanted that? Is that something they can get? How does that work?
I'm working on that. Logistically, it's a bit complicated because of nothing's impossible, right? But it would be a little bit tricky. I think as the request, I think maybe on my holiday, if I can make it back to Canada and the US, I might be able to leave a batch there, and then it'll be much more convenient to send out. Right now, with all of the tariffs issues and stuff, I don't even know. There was a day where I think the US wasn't accepting mail from China, and then that got reversed. So it is a bit tricky. My partner in More Publishing is from Georgia. He's heading there for a vacation, I think in about a month. So yeah, I mean, if I had requests for signed copies, I could ask him to load up a suitcase with a few copies. I have some copies here. I could get them signed, leave them at his garage in Atlanta or outside of Atlanta, and then have some in my family place in Ottawa or Toronto, Canada as well. So yeah, that's sort of something that I haven't had a chance to really set up yet. But if there was a demand, if there was a request, of course, that's really interesting. I have a little signed by author shelf with some of my favorites and some friends of mine that have given me books they've written and signed. And it's kind of nice to have a special edition, whether that's signed or hardcover or even both. So if anybody wanted a signed edition, you could reach out to me on my website, jorahkai.com. I think there's a contact form, or hit me up on Blue Sky or X and that kind of thing, and ask for one. I'd be happy to fulfill that. It would be an honor to have a place of privilege on your library.
And since he mentioned where you can contact him, all of those links will be in the show notes. So if you want to reach out, follow him, find out about his process. If you're like a English nerd who studied it in college and you just want to relive your glory days of academia, you can hit him up. He's got community that seems to be pretty active over there on Blue Sky, where they talk nerdy about books. He has a Twitter account. I'm not sure how active you are there, but I know it exists because I've seen it.
Yeah, no, I have all the accounts. I've been mostly active on Blue Sky lately, but when something big happens, I'll hit them all up and say hi.
I know other authors have said that they've just found more of a bookish community on Blue Sky for whatever reason. I've noticed the same thing when it comes to like video platforms. I do better as far as engagement on Rumble and BitChute because a lot of the people that are in the book talk type communities were kicked off originally of YouTube because under Susan Wojcicki, I'm probably butchering her Polish name, but at one point in time, like the romance covers were getting banned because the man chest was, nudity, or the shifter romance was considered relations with animals. Like at that point in time, when they were all getting kicked off for ridiculous reasons because none of it was real, they went over to other communities. And I know I say that to say Blue Sky seems to have a lot of, it's the Twitter version. I think it's analogous to Twitter, but it's like more bookish, I guess.
There's a lot of book people around, and I think they're really open and they're very engaged. I guess maybe because it's new, but there's a big community for horror, for fantasy, and sci-fi, as well as authors just talking about what they're doing and their craft and that kind of stuff. So,
because Twitter stayed for too long so political, left or right, people that wanted. It smothered the conversation if you don't really know how to curate your feed, it would be easy to lose the stuff you wanted to see and the constant scrolling. Whereas Blue Sky, in theory, and I haven't gone on there myself, it's on my to-do list. It's very long. I'm told it's more user friendly, which allows you to kind of follow those conversations you want to follow.
Yeah. The interesting thing about Blue Sky, from what I've heard, is they don't actually have an algorithm. So it's literally your news feed is just the people you follow. And you can look up hashtags. So there's like a red blood. If you want to post like Horror Sky, you put a blood mark emoji. Book Sky, you put like a stack of books emoji. If you want to do like an environmental post, you put like an earth emoji. And those kind of things just get picked up by people that subscribe to those interests. So it's super organic. And so you're not being fed things by an algorithm. You just like sign up for things you like, and then people show you the stuff that you're interested in. So it is kind of different. It's kind of neat in that sense.
In theory, that was what the algorithm was supposed to do, but all sides put their dirty, grubby little hands in it, and they ruined it for everybody.
Yeah. But wherever you find your social media, the book's out there, and I hope you like it if you get a chance to read it. And I got some other books too, and I just redid my nonfiction trilogy, and I have another couple of books I'm working on. Hopefully, I got another one. Just give it a quick plug for a minute because I'm a teacher. It's kind of fun to experiment, and I teach EFL high school in Chongqing, China. So a book this big, like Hemingway book, is too it's too substantial and too literary. Maybe if I was teaching college level, which is another option at some point. But I just came up with this little book called Hunger Below, and I made it in Chinese and English. Well, I made it in English, and I helped turn it into Chinese. And it's like a 12-chapter little short story about summer of 1983 in Flagstaff, Arizona, somewhere between like Stranger Things, Stephen King's It, and the sort of Navajo TV show Dark Winds. The main character is a Navajo Dene character, and he's kind of trying to be an American boy, but with a native indigenous kind of background, and he's got some different friends, and there's kind of like a curse, kind of a sickness in a town, again, a historical kind of issue. So it's a way to think about history and legacy and culture with a cosmic horror twist. And it's really fun because for me, it's the first time I was able to bring in my book to my class and just we read a chapter every week with other stuff that we do. And we get to talk about these interesting topics and cosmic horror. And I think they're cool. It's kind of cool to see kids walking around my high school. I put 900 of the kids, grade 1, class, they're all carrying this little book with my name on it and my picture on the back on the author's page. And it's kind of fun because it's one thing to be a teacher and a writer, but to be able to put them together is interesting. And it's great to have this, fish in a barrel, 900 kids beta reading my new book. And so this summer, I'm hoping to finish this. It's kind of an Old Man in the Sea style short story. It's pretty short. It's about 15,000 words. And I'm going to work on it as a full-length novel, which hopefully maybe next year or the year after, depending how things go. That'll be my next published horror book.
Okay, so you're skirting the line between speculative fiction and literary fiction, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
All right, and as usual, all of his links will be in the show notes, and you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We've got our Spotify, our Discord, our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, save the shenanigans from Madam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram and Twitter and the email. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till it pours out of their eyeballs, and they'll swim away on a river of Java. And speaking of coffee, that coffee brand coffee link is in the show notes. Use the code PODCASTGRUNTS. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy and absentee co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, thank you for coming on, Jorah. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, J.R. I had a blast.
All right, and with that, we're going to hit the end button.